Reparations for Black people has always been a controversial topic. I have to add in the for Black people part because other groups have previously and currently received reparations. I'm a little late, but the news and social media have still been unhinged in their criticism of the San Francisco reparations proposal. The $5 million payout to each eligible Black person has been the biggest headline for the last few months. But has anyone actually read the proposal, or are they just co-opting talking points from another person who has also never read the proposal? For the majority, it's the latter. So today we'll take a look at the full reparations proposal. I'm not going to read the entire proposal, of course, because it's 60 pages long, but I am going to go through each section and highlight specific passages. This will give you a more complete understanding of the proposal itself and answers many questions, including the reasoning with some history you probably didn't know, the complete list of recommendations, and the people who form the committee. Real quick before we get started, hit that like button one time for me and subscribe for actual factual data and analysis. Also, make sure you share this video because many people speaking on this are uninformed. Let's start with the people who form the committee. The committee is composed of a variety of individuals with a wide range of experiences and expertise. The 15 advisory committee members went through a nomination process and were unanimously appointed to serve by the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in May of 2021. They call for people with specific requirements, for example, an individual who works for a media outlet that primarily serves the Black community, an individual who has been displaced from San Francisco due to gentrification. I'm not going to read all 15, but I want to highlight a few. An individual with expertise in private equity, venture capital, or fundraising in the financial industry. An individual with experience as a small business owner, principally serving the African American community. A person who works in the technology industry with experience in the field of technological equity. A person representing the sectors of the Office of Economic and Workforce Development with experience in predominantly African American communities. And they also list off construction, building and trades, hospitality, medical sectors. This isn't just a random group of people throwing out numbers. The people I just highlighted have a large amount of expertise when it comes to the economy and all the different types of discrimination Black people experience. Speaking of discrimination, we'll skip down a little bit, passing the definition of reparations with examples like victims of the CDC's Tuskegee syphilis study, victims of the Rosewood massacre, and more. We get to about 13 pages worth of reasons why Black people are owed reparations. They give many different reasons and none of them are slavery. So people who say California was not a slave state are correct, and they address that point directly in this proposal. But before we get to that part, I'm gonna highlight some of the reasons why Black people from San Francisco deserve reparations even though it wasn't a slave state. I'll read the first paragraph, then I'll just skip around about 13 pages hitting points here and there. In June 2022, the task force produced an interim report that documents the institution of slavery, the creation and maintenance of a white supremacy racial caste system, its impact on African Americans, and begins to outline what is owed to Black descendants of chattel slavery. In order to educate the California public on both the national and statewide history of anti-Black racial discrimination, the report details white supremacist hatred torture, lynching, and other forms of extreme racial violence towards Black people. The interim report focuses on anti-Black, racist federal, state, and local government actions and negligence throughout American history and into the modern day. Citing international law and the United Nations, the report emphasizes when a government is responsible for wrongful actions or negligence that causes injustice to a specific group of people, it has a duty to remedy those actions. Now I'm going to start skipping down the page. I'm going to highlight several passages to help you grasp the content of these 13 to 14 pages of reasons why Black people in San Francisco deserve reparations. The California KKK gained significant political influence during their resurgence through positions of power. Members exerted their authority as elected officials, district attorneys, and police officers. Scare tactics like harassment, vandalism, and arson were common tools used against Black Americans. In the early days of California's founding, Black Americans experienced crime without the ability to seek recourse through the legal justice system. The California Supreme Court categorically barred any testimony from Black people. The stereotypes created to support slavery have shaped the modern-day implicit biases against the Black population in the American public and within the police force. One study found that 27% of the people killed in the San Francisco Bay Area were Black residents, even though they only comprised 7% of the total population at the time. Most of the suburbs in San Francisco were known as sundown towns, where Black people were prohibited from living or being present after sunset. I'm gonna skip down 3 to 4 pages. To this day, Black-owned homes are valued significantly less than white-owned homes within the San Francisco metropolitan area. A study in 2020 found that Black-owned homes are devalued by 29% compared to their white-owned counterparts. This trend makes Black neighborhoods and homes particularly vulnerable to gentrification. The urban renewal and gentrification that took place in San Francisco has created generational impact and decimated Black communities. One study from the National Community Reinvestment Coalition found that San Francisco was one of the most rapidly gentrifying cities from 2013 to 2017. Almost 90% of the currently gentrified areas in San Francisco were formerly redlined or deemed definitely declining by the Homeowners Loan Corporation. As a result of segregation, redevelopment, and rent spikes, the Black community has been forced to relocate from the city. In the 1970s, 10% of San Francisco's population identified as Black, compared to the 5% today. Then we get to this section talking about the impact of Proposition 209. The destruction and disregard of Black-owned business is prevalent to this day. A 1996 constitutional amendment banning affirmative action. The consequences of Prop 209's passage has been the systematic exclusion of people of color and women. It also mentions the child welfare system in San Francisco continues to separate families. Discrimination in healthcare for Black Bay Area residents has negatively affected the community's access to basic services. Skipping down to the section, a legacy of institutional harms to San Francisco's black communities, we skip down to San Francisco's Slavery Era Disclosure Ordinance. Institutionally, today's financial wealth in San Francisco can be tied to profits procured during enslavement. In 2006, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors passed the Slavery Era Disclosure Ordinance, SEDO, authored by former District 10 Supervisor Sophie Maxwell. This ordinance enumerates the legacy of systemic harms that have disproportionately affected the black community as a result of the practice of slavery in the United States, and requires that city contractors providing insurance or insurance services, financial services, or textiles to the city must complete an affidavit verifying whether the contractor, its parent company, or subsidiary has participated in or received profits from chattel slavery. The SEDO offers precedent for the city and county of San Francisco to acknowledge its role in economically benefiting from those affected by this historical injustice. In compliance with the city and county's slavery disclosure ordinance, the following companies have shared that their economic profits are historically tied to the institution of chattel slavery: Bank of America, U.S. Bank National Association. I highly doubt these are the only companies that have profits tied to slavery, but good on them for at least acknowledging it. Now they need to cut the check. Skipping down more, they talk about black migration to San Francisco. I found it interesting that one of San Francisco's founding fathers was a mixed race black and Jewish man. Skipping down to the section, a growing community, workforce discrimination, education discrimination, we skip down to the section titled Early Community Development. African Americans moving to San Francisco initially were legally limited to living in certain parts of the city due to the exclusionary language in housing deeds called restrictive covenants, which only allowed white people to occupy the dwelling. They also include a picture of one of these mortgage contracts that reads, "No property in said addition shall at any time be sold, conveyed, rented, or leased in whole or in part to any person or persons not of the white or Caucasian race." Skipping down, passing the impact of those contracts and to the end of the section, I want to highlight this conclusion paragraph where they address California not being a slave state. While neither San Francisco nor California formally adopted the institution of chattel slavery, the values of segregation, white supremacy, and systematic repression and exclusion of black people were legally codified and enforced. The San Francisco Reparations Plan is guided by quantitative data, the conclusions from previous reports on the status of African American communities in San Francisco, and extensive qualitative feedback shared by people with first-hand lived experiences as black citizens in San Francisco. I was really skipping around those pages, but you should be able to get the gist of those pages listing nothing but justifications for reparations. If you still think black people aren't owed reparations, you weren't listening. Let's skip to the eligibility requirements. These first two things are required. An individual who has identified as black, African American on public documents for at least 10 years and 18 years or older. You must meet at least 2 criteria from the following list and have supporting documentation. Born in San Francisco between 1940 and 1996 and has proof of residency in San Francisco for at least 13 years. Migrated to San Francisco between 1940 and 1996, have proof of residency for at least 13 years. Personally or the direct descendant of someone incarcerated by the failed war on drugs. Record of attendance in San Francisco public schools during the time of the consent decree to complete desegregation within the school system. Descendant of someone enslaved through U.S. chattel slavery before 1865. Displaced or the direct descendant of someone displaced from San Francisco by urban renewal between 1954 and 1973. Listed or the direct descendant of a certificate of preference holder. Member of an historically marginalized group that experienced lending discrimination in San Francisco between 1937 and 1968, or subsequently experienced lending discrimination in formerly redlined San Francisco communities between 1968 and 2008. Now let's get into the actual reparations recommendations. They are split up into several sections addressing specific types of discrimination, economic empowerment, rental housing and home ownership, education, etc. The section starts off with this paragraph. The recommendations are presented by the subcommittee issue areas that led the process of procurement, informed by feedback from public meetings, outreach engagements, and surveys, in addition to ongoing research conducted by subcommittees. Several recommendations emerged consistently across subcommittee areas. I'm going to read all of this first section because it refers to the financial portion that has been receiving the most criticism. The $5 million wasn't the only thing recommended here, and I think they should also be highlighted. From there, I'll jump around and highlight things in other sections. Also, each of these sections has a title, multiple objectives, actions that should be taken, then a rationale for each action. Bear with me as I read a little more than a page entitled Economic Empowerment, Financial Reparations. Objective: create a financial suite of financial reparations that is made immediately available to those who qualify under the eligibility parameters set forth by the committee. Actions: provide a one-time lump sum payment of $5 million to each eligible person. Rationale: a lump sum payment would compensate the affected population for the decades of harms that they have experienced and will redress the economic and opportunity losses that Black San Franciscans have endured collectively as the result of both intentional decisions and unintended harms perpetuated by city policy. Supplement African American income of lower income households to reflect the area median income annually for at least 250 years, $97,000. Rationale: racial disparities across all metrics have led to a significant racial wealth gap in the city of San Francisco. By elevating income to match area median income, Black people can better afford housing and achieve a better quality of life. Provide access to a spectrum of financial education from beginning to advanced. Rationale: while traditional financial education emphasizes basic financial literacy, there is a need to provide a ladder of financial education that encompasses all levels of financial knowledge so that resources match the broad spectrum of financial levels that exist throughout the community. Create public bank framework to ensure that unbanked people have fair options and expanded access to credit, loans, financing, and other tools for leveraging financial power. Rationale. The ongoing quest for a public bank provides an opportunity for the city to offer options for populations that have been historically denied access to traditional and financial institutions. Similar to credit unions, a public bank can be a safety net to ensure that those on the financial margins have access to competitive rates and can access traditional pathways to build financial resilience. Recruit a Black-owned community bank to San Francisco, or expand an existing institution with a Black-owned partner financial institution or a freedmen's bank. While the public bank framework is targeted towards marginalized communities broadly, a Black-owned community bank or credit union is a must. Allocate Community Reinvestment Act funds from banks that are specifically earmarked to meet the credit needs of low and moderate income communities and invest them in communities that they are intended to benefit. Increase lending in Black business owners and homeowners in Black communities. Offer additional grants to supporting Black people in historically redlined neighborhoods or who have been denied banking options from other financial institutions. Offer alternatives to traditional credit scores or other means of qualification, including matching or augmenting community giving frameworks. Support fair and equitable appraisals for all types of transactions. Finance a comprehensive debt forgiveness program that clears all educational, personal, credit card, payday loans, etc. Rationale. Black households are more likely to hold costlier, riskier debt and are more likely to have outstanding student debt. When this is combined with lower household incomes, it creates an inescapable cycle of debt. Eliminating this debt gives Black households an opportunity to build wealth. Offer retirement planning services and services available to augment current retirees' financial state, particularly for low-wage workers. Rationale. Those who have already reached retirement age have undoubtedly endured racial discrimination. Introduce tax credits for those who qualify for reparations, payroll tax, business tax, property tax, etc. Create a Black Reparations Trust or other entity that can accept funds for the sole purpose of investing in Black communities. Such an entity should allow donations from individuals and corporations who want to give their land, real property, or financial assets to the reparations effort. Explore and create structures and pathways to mitigate tax consequences for recipients of reparations funds. Create mechanisms for enforcement and accountability for all activities related to reparations. Create legal structures to protect those who receive reparations from financial speculators or predators, including court block accounts / trust accounts. Rationale. Given the history of financial institutions preying on underbanked communities, and especially given the vulnerability of the subsets of this population, such as seniors and youth, this body recommends putting legal parameters and structures in place to ensure access to funds and to mitigate speculative harm done by others. That's the end of the financial reparations section. As you can see, rationale was provided for every suggestion but was overlooked by the critics. They also cite the studies referenced in the footnotes. Now I'm gonna skip around through the next section, but want to highlight some important things. Let's take a look at rental housing and home ownership. Objective: ensure that all members of the affected community have access to affordable, quality housing options at all income levels. The actions for rental housing. The Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, MOHCD, should remove barriers to qualification for subsidized and below market rate BMR rental units. MOHCD should offer first choice for rental units to those who qualify for reparations, and the city should cover any cost differentials that may serve as a barrier of qualification. Rationale: housing is a human right, and increasingly even BMR units are unattainable for renters because affordability thresholds are too high to be affordable to those with moderate or low incomes. By removing these barriers and or subsidizing rents for those who qualify, the city creates expanded opportunities for people to access rental housing. In the section home ownership, I'm going to start skipping around again here. Guarantee continued funding for the Dreamkeeper Down Payment Assistance Loan Program, and convert the program from a loan to a forgivable grant over the course of 10 years, which shall be offered to eligible reparations recipients regardless of income. Rationale: using the standards of and explains the existing programs, expands market rate home ownership opportunities for Black San Franciscans. By eliminating the repayment requirements for this program and converting it to a 30-year no interest, no payment loan into a fully forgivable grant, the city can make meaningful investment in retaining and growing its African American population. It also represents a commitment to addressing the loss in home ownership and household wealth that occurred as a result of displacement caused by urban renewal in the 1960s and 1970s. The city and county of San Francisco should cover additional monthly costs, example, homeowners association fees, parking fees, etc., related to housing stabilization and new constructions. Rationale: many available home ownership opportunities are in condominiums or tenancy in common buildings that incur additional monthly costs in addition to the standard principal, interest, taxes, and insurance costs. HOA fees can add hundreds of dollars to monthly costs and act as an affordability barrier for property ownership. This recommendation would allow more people to access these housing opportunities by minimizing financial barriers. The city and county of San Francisco and MOHCD should offer grants for home maintenance and repair costs. Rationale: the existing senior home repair program offers a model for maintenance and repair grants. This program can be expanded for all homeowners who qualify for reparations. MOHCD should address and remove barriers built into the BMR program that limits wealth building potential. Rationale: currently, MOHCD's guidelines prevent BMR inhabitants from building wealth through home ownership. BMR owners do not realize the full appreciation of their home's value if or when they choose to sell, are barred from renting the property to both short and long-term tenants, and should a leaseholder pass away, the property cannot be inherited by their descendant. While AARAC acknowledges that these stipulations were presumably put in place to mitigate the potential for using subsidized housing for profit and to maintain a pool of affordable properties, the impact is that this effectively creates a tiered system that further perpetuates the racial wealth gap. Therefore, MOHCD should amend these practices to offer BMR owners opportunities to realize capital benefits from their property. Convert public housing units into condominiums with a $1 buy-in for qualifying residents, so the residents can own not only their unit, but all of the common areas as well. This last one didn't have a rationale included, and read differently than presented by the media. That's purchase of a converted public housing unit for $1 as opposed to the $1 homes narrative. Now I'm really going to skip around because they have a large number of issues they seek to address. So I'm just going to give an example or two from each section. Spatial justice cooperatives and community space ownership. Objective: create vibrant community hubs and support cultural institutions centered on the Black community. And then they list a few here: 1550 Evans, Fillmore Heritage Center, American Arts and Culture Complex, San Francisco African American Arts and Culture District. Others identified through community outreach. Fully fund African American cultural districts and seed them with the first 5 to 10 years of operating expenses to set them up for success. So they're just talking about funding those areas I just listed. Job creation and succession. Prioritize Black San Franciscans and local growth industries. Align educational, professional, and economic development pathways to ensure successful outcomes across all employer levels in these industries. Prioritize members of San Francisco's current and past African American communities for employment opportunities, training programs, professional certification, partnerships, and contracting. Additionally, create dedicated placement services to assist both experienced, mid-career, and entry-level candidates. Black business ownership and entrepreneurship. Objective: to support Black entrepreneurs and ensure that Black-owned businesses thrive in San Francisco. Rationale: a campus with real estate owned by the trust to create industry incubators that will train, provide jobs, and provide space and investment for Black people getting into emerging industries or already practicing. And here's another objective here: fill funding gaps for Black entrepreneurs and expand opportunities to access capital. Education, formal recognition of institutional harms. Objective: acknowledge the harm done to past generations of Black students in San Francisco and take steps to prevent future harms. Ensure that schools across San Francisco have adequate funding that prioritizes neighborhoods that have had a legacy of educational disinvestment. Objective 2, make meaningful financial investments in students and communities to address past structural harms. Fund tuition assistance for 2 to 4 year college institutions, trade school, and other secondary school options. Objective 3, invest in educational infrastructure to ensure that all SF-USD students have equitable access to quality school buildings and resources. Actions: establish an Afrocentric K-12 school in San Francisco, similar to existing culturally specific schools in San Francisco. Creating Black-centered educational pathways. I'm just gonna skip through a few of the objectives here. Create pathways for African American students to pursue both traditional and non-traditional educational opportunities. Develop incentives for retaining Black educators in San Francisco. Provide housing stipends for Black educators commensurate with market rate housing needs. And there's another section here: interrupting the school to prison pipeline. Objective: offer creative, community-informed options to support students who are most at risk of becoming involved in the criminal justice program. Education is about 6 pages. I'm gonna skip through that. Health. Objective: acknowledge the insult, assault, and intergenerational harm caused by the city and county of San Francisco as it relates to the mental, physical, and environmental health of Black San Franciscans. Health goes on for about 3 pages. Policy. Objective. Address the historical and existing state policies that have disproportionately harmed San Francisco's African American communities. List several policies like repealing Prop 209 that we covered earlier. And that's the end of the proposal. There is an addendum with all of the data and the goals, but it's everything we've already read through, so I'm not going to go through this part. I am going to quickly point out the sources used for this proposal: U.S. Census, U.S. Department of Commerce, Association of the Bay Area Government, and on and on. Now, if you were critical of the reparations proposal, you have absolutely nothing to say now. The rationale for these recommendations were explained very thoroughly by a committee of experts in the economy, equity, technology, and the overall Black experience. If you still believe this proposal is absurd, I would submit that as evidence of you subscribing to white supremacy ideology at best, or a full-blown white supremacist KKK skinhead at worst. I'm not from San Francisco, so I didn't know much of this information specifically. However, much of this has occurred across the country in a similar fashion, or worse. Just think about it logically. California was not a slave state, yet racist ideology pervaded the city through 13 pages of overt racism. Imagine what Black people faced in states that actively participated in the slave trade. Reparations is not a handout. Reparations is a debt owed to Black America. I'm gonna wrap up this video here. Make sure you like and share this video so uninformed people can have this information. Share it with the racists on your timeline. Also, make sure you subscribe if you found this content valuable and support the channel. I'm out.